So we'll start with secure collaboration. In the context of secure collaboration, how can we strike the right balance between accessibility and security, especially when dealing with remote working and distributed teams? Who wants to start?
So I think clearly things have changed since COVID. Home working is a thing, not just in defence, but it's affected every organisation in every part of industry. And that previous preconception around defence being something that you can't work remotely, it needs that additional level of security, you have to operate in these ways, was dispelled at the point where the need was such that you had to find a way to solve it. And I think we've come through that now, and the world is a different place as a result. So collaboration is a necessity, and that's not just within employees of an organisation. So again, there's a fair focus around the strategies, the policies, and the direction of travel for MOD and how that part of government is evolving and working towards achieving those new ways of working. But the interoperability with industry, and that's industry at both an enterprise level, but also the whole SME community that's driving that innovation and agility, how they all work together and how they work with MOD is now very different. And I think one of the key things that we're certainly aware of, and this is quite a common conversation at this point in time, that traditional method of using an MOD deployed laptop as the method by which you communicate over email is ending. I think it's the end of this year, those services will not be available anymore. And what and how, not so much the enterprise organisations, but certainly the individual SMEs, the small consultants, the people that are part of that whole community, how they continue to collaborate is certainly an open question at this point.
Thanks, Steve. I'm aware of so there are some challenges, but there are a couple of higher classification programs which I won't dwell on too much in terms of which ones, but there are some domains I think that are very much reliant on the innovation, and if you think about the people who are supporting the industry, MOD, staff supporting some of those programs, where you have traditional programs with, let's face it, old estate infrastructure. What has happened previously is you get a congregation of SME support around a certain location, and that creates a sort of a local ecosystem. The challenge today, of course, is that the MOD, we all have to reach out to the market and get the best teams we can, and so the challenge is how do you get the best people to support these programs. So I think that part of the challenge is how do you address the old legacy estate infrastructure and recreate or create an infrastructure that allows accessibility for individuals, SMEs, and larger enterprise programs to all input and contribute to that domain. And as I said, there are one or two programs at the moment which have a high demand of change and a high demand of data hosting and infrastructure change. And I'm not entirely sure that we've absolutely cracked that, but it is certainly it's a very relevant challenge, not just for the Ministry of Defence, but also I think for us as industry as well, as the enterprise.
Do you think then the risk appetite has changed post-pandemic in terms of secure collaboration?
So I think kind of post-pandemic there's been a lot more focus around what collaboration really means in a lot of those environments, and we've gone from a model where multiple agencies or multiple programs would have to issue devices for individuals to work directly on that piece of kind of information or on that specific project, and getting to the stage where actually when materials and equipment was in short supply, it just wasn't viable to add more people to that framework. And so looking for a suitably secure model where you could allow people to collaborate or enroll in new environments was absolutely fundamental. So people started looking at kind of VDI, zero client solutions, elements where effectively you can work securely across multiple projects, multiple programs, multiple end clients without risking intermingling their data. But I think the key thing for me around the focus around collaboration and the risk appetite associated with it is that organisations have moved from having a pool or a store of their own data and inviting people in to work on it to realising that a lot of the true collaborative opportunities are coming from sharing data from multiple partners. So effectively multiple contributors bringing their own data. And where you worked in isolated environments previously, that meant everyone establishing suitable assurance to bring their own sensitive information into a centrally controlled environment. And we're now looking more at a model where people can provide secure and auditable access to their own systems to partners without having to effectively go through information sharing agreements and large exports of data from their own environments into kind of these third environments. You're getting to the stage where people are now able to more actively and dynamically collaborate on their secure data without effectively having to create a new silo to do that in.
And is that including then the zero trust model?
So most of those environments are effectively taking a zero trust architectural approach to establishing that, effectively because it gives them that granularity of control and establishes more policy-based access. So effectively each collaborating partner can set their own access criteria and control them directly, whereas the previous model was to establish a set of commonly agreed controls. In the new collaborative model, you're still allowing each organisation to define their own criteria, but meet them through a common set of technical components, which means that you give people accountability and responsibility without them having to kind of give up that element of sovereignty around their own information.
And Adam, if I may, that model you've just described, that is equally applicable to not just the domestic market, but the international partnerships. So if we're looking at Five Eyes, the Five Eyes community, for instance, and others, there are some large change programs coming down the pipe from the Ministry of Defence, which involve some of those international collaborations. The model you've just described is equally applicable. Yeah.
The next question is around the digital backbone, which is much more MOD focused. So
I'll start. You can.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
what are the positives and impacts of the digital backbone and how it works with secure collaboration from a defence perspective?
Okay, so I think it's important to start with the digital backbone is more of a strategic intent as opposed to this is not a replacement network, which is sometimes confused. And you need to really look at the MOD's digital strategies, again, all available publicly in terms of their cloud initiatives and all the programs that are going alongside achieving that digital backbone, by which they mean basing their decisions, basing their actions around access to the right data at the right time and delivering that to where it's needed. That involves huge amounts of change in both policy, technology, and fundamentally culture. The defence industry particularly has been doing what it does for a good number of years, trying to now evolve and meet and utilise those new digital technologies to achieve that aim is harder around the regulations and controls that have been traditionally put into there. So as much of that is cultural as it is actually a technical change. So the digital backbone itself is a vision and an aim as opposed to necessarily being a program in its own right. So where collaboration really fits into that is that to achieve that overall aim, how that data is gathered, where it's shared, with whom it's shared, how it's accessed. Again, it leads to some of the security principles that Adam's outlined around a data-centric view of information security as opposed to a network view that traditionally has been in place.
So where does cloud fit into that then?
So I think cloud, again, there are different flavours of cloud, and I know we'll come on to mod cloud as probably one of those topics at some point, but the use of public hyperscale cloud happens across all industries, and defence is no exception to that. So there is a place for that kind of information, data, and the use of those technologies and services within the industry, within defence. And the interest is really where that's not the case, and finding only the reasons why that particular set of data and that outcome needs a different set of security principles around it, as opposed to the traditional network-centric approach of everything on that network has to operate at this level. So it's the data-centric view of what should go where does it need to be hosted, who and how it needs to be accessed. Cloud's the underlying infrastructure that enables that to happen, as opposed to a solution. And whether that's private cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, all the other variants that are out there, fundamentally it's the compute and the storage that sits underneath the outcomes. And really the key to achieving that overall aim of the digital backbone is the interoperability between those cloud infrastructures, wherever they are and whoever that actually owns and operates them, without the ability for them to talk to each other and share data and provide access at the right levels. We're back to siloed information, haven't actually solved the overall challenge of providing the right data to the right people at the right time.
So have we changed the focus to outcome/services, or are we still siloed?
I think the strategy is clear that it has to achieve an outcome focus. One area of discussion is perhaps whether that's currently defence-centric, in that I think they've got a good view of what that needs to look like within defence particularly. But again, in this modern age, the information that you need is not solely within the defence community, and how you interact then with, as Alasdair's mentioned, other nations is one example, but even within our own country, the sharing of information between law enforcement, military, CNI, there's so many crossovers where, again, replicating information, deciding who's got control over access to certain systems and so on, that set of barriers has to be thought about and considered outside of defence. It's how does government operate at the right level and take that data-centric view, rather than how does defence do it differently to other departments. So true interoperability will only come when those are joined up.
I think the backbone has had a mixed press over the last few years. I think the good news is that there's been some considerable progress recently. So we talk about so if you look at the concept of the secure by design, that the now mandated demands within procurement to ensure that the capability that is being procured will actually deliver the capability. And central to that, increasingly, is the use of the data, the hosting of the data, and how you want to use it. So we're seeing now through policy change, regulation, the work that Defence Digital are doing, Caroline Bellamy and the team, and so on, are making real progress there. And on top of that, again, the recent launch of the Integrated Design Authority, the IDA. Launched, I think, at DSCI recently. Again, that's another physical, real example of process transformational change happening within the Ministry of Defence that will enable this, the getting through the challenge of the stovepipes and so on, and ensuring that those critical data components are in the system requirement spec. They are managed and they are able to be delivered as part of that capability. Now, this is a huge transformational process change for the Ministry of Defence. From an enterprise point of view, what I think we are seeing is the Ministry reaching out into industry and into enterprise to say, what is best practice, not just best practice in the UK, but what are the global enterprises doing in other parts of the world to bring that level of innovation in order to get the very best out of the use of data. And so we're now starting to see the use of data fabric and other mechanisms, architectures, and so on. So the backbone promised a lot. It's not a thing. It's more of a direction of travel, but it's certainly, I think, making progress.
And how would you see, Adam, that the defence view mirrored in law enforcement and criminal justice?
I think the approach has been fairly consistent across a lot of, certainly the kind of national security and law enforcement sectors. I think the key thing is, like from an architectural and technology point of view, we're very much these days speaking about interoperability. Whereas actually if you look at the history of the last 10 years of approaches doing that, it's mostly focused actually around integration and very formalised information exchanges that were very susceptible and kind of brittle for things like data format changes. So if you started collecting new formats of data, you normally broke a lot of those exchanges. There was a heavy kind of change management overhead. And the approach to resolving that was typically to try to get organisations to standardise around a technology, a tool to smooth those operation issues where you just make sure they have the same thing both sides of the fence. But that imposed quite a lot of commercial constraints on organisations that didn't always react kindly to it. And actually the focus now has very much been around understanding that each organisation has its kind of legacy or heritage environment, it has its own mission goals and operational objectives, and that those can be best met through potentially different technologies, but that they still need to be able to exchange information in fairly open, flexible and responsive ways. And I think the growth of kind of agile development approaches, a lot of cloud technologies, has led to a real focus around those touch points between systems rather than looking to reinforce strict technical standards or direct technologies within those environments.
So do we feel as a panel then that the government digital strategy is addressing the need for greater collaboration and interoperability?
It has certainly set down interoperability as an objective that everyone should be working towards. I think it still obviously leaves the discretion about how that's achieved down to individual system and service owners, which I think is kind of a natural consequence of existing governance models. The challenge being that most of those organisations are still budget and resource constrained, and where they don't have high levels of interoperability kind of available to them at the moment, are still going to have to work out how to achieve that alongside their day-to-day operational pressures.
Yeah, I think just picking up on one of the points that Adam's raised is that commercial impact. It's quite difficult to see where and how you solve some of those problems of interoperability when each department's got a budget to meet its own objectives. And the cost of implementing things in a way that opens up that ability to exchange data and share, it comes at a cost, but at whose cost? In that, both those organisations, the collaboration almost needs to start long before the technology is discussed. Do the policies and the guiding principles around what both organisations are trying to achieve together, if they're not clear, then how they get realised is going to hit them further down the line when the costs come in to deliver a solution to it. So I think it's something that needs to be considered at that level, and as we're aware from partly the Tech UK relationship and 923 being involved in chairing the cybersecurity community for SMEs. There are ongoing conversations with Cabinet Office. They have put out papers on what it is they're looking to achieve in terms of interoperability and collaboration, how to work at higher levels of classification. They are sharing those desires and those outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and reaching out to industry, both enterprise and SME communities, to say, what do you think is the right answer? What's the best practice? Where do we go with this? And again, it's good to see a sort of an open dialogue around not just setting out this is how it's going to be done and these are the policies under which we're going to operate, but actually trying to invite industry and innovation back in to guide those principles before systems start to be designed and acquired.
Just perhaps one note on that. So I think with this, in regard of collaboration, just to highlight the importance of the SME community. So I think today the Ministry of Defence allocates something like 25% of its budget is spent towards spent with SMEs. In order for the capability to be delivered with the level of innovation and the pace and the tempo that the threat environment is increasingly demanding, there just needs to be a faster, more agile way of bringing in those SMEs, bringing in the innovation, and I think there's a opportunity situation here where, you know, the likes of the big enterprise primes, for instance, need to really open up as well and help drive some of those relationships to help the SME community in order to create the demonstration environment, de-risk the technology, de-risk the various threats and so on. So we're not there yet, but it is starting to happen. But there's certainly a need for a relationship between the SMEs and the wider big primes in facilitating that, I would suggest.
So, Alasdair, you talked about secure by design being mandatory, and secure by design is all about building effective and proportionate cybersecurity into the delivery of new government services. So, how does the panel see secure by design helping to ensure the continuation and evolution of security of these collaborative solutions?
Well, I think as we noted earlier, I mean, secure by design is a mandatory regulatory change in the procurement process. My understanding is from what I'm viewing and hearing from the ministry is that programs will not be signed off and delivered unless the key requirements and all aspects are coherent and deliverable. This is less about technology. This is more about internal procurement process, but it's absolutely vital to the world we're in. It's vital to optimizing, getting the best use out of the data, particularly given the demands of the huge increasing demands of data loading, hosting, and applications. So in answer to your question, secure by design is a great step forward. It needs to be actively managed, and from what I understand and see from various reports, is that it is now, you know, it's part of the procurement process. We can't allow that not to be so.
So I think secure by design is one of those initiatives that absolutely had to happen. It's how you bring the assessment and what was accreditation of systems and solutions from the network-centric, product-centric view that has operated for a good number of years. Now, in this desire to change how those solutions and services are delivered, then how they're accredited and approved had to evolve with it. In practice, what that actually means for organisations, it's the cultural impact of that and trying to work out, well, okay, I get the principles, but how as an organisation delivering services into that? What do I now have to do? Who's going to sign this off? Who's going to accredit this? Well, it doesn't work that way anymore, and trying to understand where and how you provide that level of assurance, it's a different process, it's a different culture. So there's an area of uncertainty around it, but I think that's necessary because it's new and it's a change in direction. But as Alasdair said, it has had to happen. It is happening. It's now a thing that organisations have got to get their head around and work with. So, yeah, immature in terms of a new way to work. And I think over the next few years, we'll really start to see how to implement that effectively. But again, it's the pace of change. Changing technology, changing platforms, changing direction. It had to happen in order for not just the MOD, but effectively government's procurement policies and the delivery of services to keep pace.
So secure by design as a kind of a policy and a framework is interesting and relatively new for people to respond to. But actually, so I took my first architecture role in 2010, and we were talking about security by design as a fundamental design principle back then. So actually, in certain sectors, it's been a kind of established practice for the last kind of going on 14 years at least, and that's just when I started kind of paying attention to it. I think the element for that has been, and as kind of Steve's absolutely highlighted, the question is in whose judgment it being secure enough or suitably secure now rests, because previously organisations have had a national standard or a national compliance framework or a national authority, they could kind of ask to say, can you please let us know if that is, we think that's okay, but can you let us know if it actually meets the standard? And we're now looking at that authority being very much delegated down to the service owners to work out what their own standards will be, what the approaches will be, but also kind of in whose judgment and assessment it's going to be considered. The ultimate risk rests with all of the end client organisations and those service owners, but previously they've not had to be their own technical authorities, and there'll be a question about whether they have the retained capability to act in that authoritative manner or whether they're going to need external support for it. But if you look across kind of defence industry, the kind of law enforcement supporting industries, a lot of those organisations have been expected to do that and demonstrate how they've approached security by design for kind of 10 plus years. So actually to a certain extent is public sector starting to adopt practices it's expected of its commercial partners, which absolutely is the right approach. You know, you should very much drink your own champagne in that space, and they're starting to hold themselves to the same standards they've always tried to hold the market to.
So where does 923 fit in with secure by design?
Sounds like a sell. Thanks. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think the part of the answer is in that that description of how you design and deliver a service hasn't changed. It needed to be secure before. It still needs to be secure now. And whilst the risks may have changed and the policies and the principles by which you're measured have changed, they are the same policies and principles. So I think where 923 fit into that is by applying the expertise and the knowledge that we've built up over 12 years of not just one industry sector, but actually being able to take some of that advice and knowledge from cross-government deliveries where best practice doesn't come from one department, it comes from that, again, collaboration between departments, and experience is the same. We're not focused entirely on the defence sector. We are focused on delivering cyber secure solutions, and some of the knowledge and some of the expertise that's come from that has been developed from services we've delivered into other parts of industry, where we can offer that benefit in and say, well, actually, this problem's been solved in a different environment, and with a few small changes, we can achieve the outcome you're looking for by applying that technology or that knowledge. So I think 923 has that cross-domain capability from a knowledge point of view and experience point of view. We are pretty much technology agnostic. We have an interest in supporting the national outcomes from a sovereignty perspective. Therefore, we've got the clearances, the platforms, the people that are focused on achieving those outcomes. And so if we can deliver the experience and the knowledge that we've built up from 12 years of working in that industry, let's hope we can help some of these other projects to achieve their outcomes, their goals.
So there's a lot of...
Yeah, I was just going to add that my understanding of the secure by design policy implementation and the, if you like, the sign off of the programs, rather than having to go through some major accreditation on each program, 923 and others, but 923 with its experience gained from elsewhere, existing programs, its enterprise experience, is able to offer, if you like, a safe, assured capability to whatever that program is. And I think as time goes on, the client, the MOD, ultimately will have its known players, its safe players, as it were. So, and in handling data, the data infrastructure, you don't need to be going through a major qualification on each program. Arguably, you're looking for a model that that you've got a number of really good, solid, safe delivery companies that will support your data requirements for multiple programs. And certainly when you start to deal with some of the complexity of the international programs as well, it's about being that safe deliverable. So I think 923 absolutely has a play there as a leading SME in that community.
Yes, I think one of the other aspects that as an SME and as that organisation that's been in this sector for as many years as we have, I mean, one of the benefits that we offer is independence, and working as a small part of an overall group of organisations trying to deliver a service. The fact that we have that independent view and that independent platform lends itself to that drive for interoperability, where multiple organisations are having to work together to deliver these large programs, as well as working with the client and international services. There are so many elements now of how that data needs to be shared, where it comes from, how you work together. So the secure by design elements, that level of assurance is not one place anymore. It's not one sector, one market. And so to a certain extent, when you're a large prime organisation, if you are entirely dependent on the IT services and the delivery and the managed service from another large enterprise organisation, there's a huge level of trust involved between them. So one of the areas that we believe we can deliver some value in is we've been around long enough. We can provide the assurances that we need. We've got the right people, the right qualifications, the right experience to deliver the level of assurance, but without necessarily being involved in the major programs that are being driven by the enterprises.
So a final question then to finish off. There's a number of innovation programs that are being that are out in the marketplace today. How does Secure by Design fit in with innovation then?
So I think back to that point on agility. Without the Secure by Design approach, I think the question is almost the reverse of how do you accelerate agility and innovation from a market where the answer was, well, who's used it before, who's signed it off, where's this accredited before I can use it, stifles innovation. How do you bring something new to the market if the question's always, well, I don't want to be the first? So by being able to provide not just an innovative solution and some concept of approaching something in a slightly different way, bringing with it the thought processes and the proof that how it's used and the security through life of that offering, by bringing that with the innovation, i.e. it's designed in, as the principal would expect, that's the only way to really tackle that and actually generate that new set of concepts and ideas. I think some of the examples of how particularly the MOD are trying to support those things, I mean, there are a number of innovative programs, but alongside that, there are some fairly fundamental changes to even the procurement frameworks and how MOD will procure services that are allowing programs up to now a much higher value than ever before, that flexibility for a project to accept and sign off on bigger value programs that wouldn't necessarily pass muster in the past. Those rigorous processes around your financial size, the enterprise organisations being the ones that can deliver that innovation, I think they're starting to finally take the steps towards building a framework underneath that, particularly from a commercial perspective, that enables the SME community to actually work directly with MOD as opposed to being part of an ecosystem through the enterprise suppliers. Now, there's a place for both, but it's encouraging to see how those changes are starting to come through.
I think if you look at the history of kind of innovation projects and programs, certainly across public sector, there was quite a tendency previously to use new products or new approaches in low risk environments, and then to start looking at the security aspects as part of the operationalizing or kind of industrialization process of looking to deploy that more widely. And then when you ran into things like security challenges, it became a fundamental disabler for that activity and effectively ended quite often quite a lot of business adoption enthusiasm. Actually, by now, through Secure by Design, building those security and management aspects into the proof points for doing proof of concept or proof of value, you're starting to bake in some of the harder questions. They were left out originally because the view was you set the bar very high for experimentation and therefore potentially created large overheads and made those processes kind of unresponsive. But as organisations have gotten into more how to do proportionate security, what secure enough means, and there's been an ease of adoption of some of those technologies and the implementation of them is no longer as much of an overhead, bringing those considerations forward to make sure you can operate them, or at least understanding how much of your organisation you can realistically operate them in, I think is absolutely key, because what you saw previously was technologies or projects with a lot of potential scope suddenly finding that the number of things they could be applied to was actually very limited in the enterprise context, because everyone's got elements of data sensitivity. Now, by building those things in earlier, you're getting more to the addressing kind of 80% of the use cases, addressing the breadth of the enterprise rather than constraining your innovation to only low risk, low sensitivity data, which frankly isn't where most organisations have their key business value.
Yeah. I was just going to say that the Secure by Design, I think, will intrinsically encourage more commercial innovation, more use of SMEs. But I also think on the client side, particularly if you think about the threat vectors, the increased demands on data, rather than and having a heavily engineered solution, grasping the innovation component, both commercially and technically, but also then the client then in dialogue with the frontline commands and actually getting a solution that is appropriate and proportionate. And it may not be that which you might have procured a few years ago, but it's fit for the task, and it's probably going to be better value. But that has to be managed, and that has to be managed between the Ministry of Defence and the frontline command. So it's as much about comes back to the internal processes and the key user requirements and how you want to deliver this solution. I think that's what I would say.
Thank you.